Thank you everyone for joining today. This is our MPO 101, our member orientation. Can everybody hear me okay right now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, awesome. And so we do this training about once a year. Last year we did it twice, just as we had some new board members come in. But this year's training is going to be a little bit different. We're trying to incorporate a little bit more information from our last year member survey and from our member one-on-one meetings. So to start off, I had this note. Sometimes we have people that are joining that are staff members from our member organizations. So there's a chance that we haven't met you before. If you could please just write your name, title, and jurisdiction in the chat, that would be great information just so we can track who is here today. You can post questions at any time during this training, and we'll have several opportunities for questions throughout the presentation, just at a couple different sections, and then we'll have a question and answer at the end as well. And this meeting, like I said, it is being recorded. We are expecting it to take the full hour and a half today, just with a little bit more information than we typically would cover as well. So as an overview of today's training, we're looking at what are metropolitan planning organizations, the introduction to DCHC MPO. So what do we specifically do? How are we different? You'll learn about the governing documents that say how we will operate, understanding our major work activities and some of the other details that go into our planning work, and understanding your role in this whole process. So what is a metropolitan planning organization, or an MPO? So metropolitan planning organizations are responsible for transportation planning and programming for a designated urban area. That area for us is the Durham urbanized area, which includes Durham County, Orange County, and Chatham County, and we'll show the maps later on what sections those are. MPOs were initially founded back in the 60s with the introduction of the Federal Aid Highway Act. And this act was largely in response to the construction of the interstate highway system, which required planning routes through and around urban areas. So they needed to create these groupings of MPOs to help with that planning process. And so with that, they also had the birth of what we call the 3C process, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But that is the continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive process to make sure that when we are planning, we're looking at all the different elements of important things we need to plan for. And so as time went on, there were different acts that came into law, and so there were things like the Housing and Urban Development Act, which made it so that regional planning policy was done by or approved by elected officials. So that's what we see today. So we have our board who approves the final policies. And so we were founded officially with our DCHC MPO name in 1980. And since then, we've had other acts that have come into play, which increased local participation. We had our state long-range plan that was required in the 1990s, which we are currently in the process of updating. And today we have the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which tells us a lot of the different policy and planning work that we're doing and a lot of the guidance and grants that are available. And so that act is in place through 2026. So as I mentioned, we have the 3C planning process that is very important to everything that we do. That is continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive, meaning that we're looking at population growth, at how land use looks and how we can help coordinate that. regional communication. So as you can see in this graphic, you have a lot of different groups. You have transit operators, you have federal agencies, interest groups, the public. Having to coordinate amongst all these different groups to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all looking to have the same results. So there are approximately 450 MPOs in the United States today. In North Carolina, we have about 19 metropolitan planning organizations or MPOs. That should be increasing. I believe we have one or two more since this map was created. We also have around 18 rural planning organizations or RPOs. We border Central Pines Regional Planning Organization, which on this map is showing as Triangle Area Regional Planning or Rural Planning Organization. And this was recently changed. So there are also some name changes that are happening, including right now the DCHC MPO. So our MPO is looking at potentially having a name change as well. We also have 14 highway divisions in the state of North Carolina. So there's a lot of different ways that the state is split up and how that planning works across different boundaries. And that is where we are located. So things that you should know about DCHC MPO and your role. Before we go into this, does anybody have any questions at this point in time? Okay, we will keep going on. So these are our current MPO boundaries. We look at the boundaries every time the census comes out. So every 10-ish years, based on COVID, it was pushed out a little bit. But the boundaries are based on the current urban area as defined in that census, as well as the forecasted 20 years past those boundaries. And so this is that current boundary. It does include all of Durham County and the more urbanized parts of Orange County and Chatham County. The MPO is composed of member jurisdictions and agencies, towns, cities, counties, universities, essentially you. So I am a part of the MPO staff, but the ultimate decisions and how those decisions are made, approved, and how we use them, those are all through you guys. So all of the different organizations that make up this area. So our MPO board is composed of the local elected officials, the North Carolina Board of Transportation, you have Go Triangle, and you also have some non-voting members on our board who help with a lot of advising. So that would be the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. Our technical committee, it consists of the staff members from all of our member jurisdictions and agencies and includes a longer list of the voting and non-voting members. And like I said, I am MPO staff, so we are part of what's called the lead planning agency. And we essentially carry out the directives that were given to us by the board and the technical committee. And so just to give you a little bit of history of how the DCHC MPO membership came to be, prior to our name as it exists today, we consisted of the city of Durham and Durham County. And in 1980, we coined the name DCHC MPO, the Durham Chapel Hill Carrboro Metropolitan Planning Organization. And at that time, we added Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and Orange County. I believe it was just a portion of Orange County, might have been smaller than it is today. And we added Go Triangle in 1989. That is the Regional Transit Authority, and that was when they were established. And then in 1990, we added the town of Hillsborough and Chatham County. And we have the NCDOT grouping up here as well, just to say that there are a lot of different members within the DOT that are a part of the organization and have been in different stages throughout this time. So to give you an idea of how we operate, here is a list of our governing documents. So we have a memorandum of understanding, which establishes the MPO as a governing body. It establishes what we will be doing, the different plans that we are required to do, things like that. We also have our bylaws. So there's one for the board and one for the technical committee. And so these lay out the voting and non-voting members, as well as the roles and responsibilities that are important for each of those bodies as they're going through meetings and other technical information. We also have the State Government Ethics Act. And so this one specifically applies to our board members in terms of having to file a few different forms every year, a few ethics forms. So these would be for real estate disclosure and a statement of economic interest. And so it's really important that when you assign a new board member, when somebody is appointed, that within 30 days they file both of those forms with the State Ethics Commission. You also have to refile every year. So I believe the deadline was yesterday, maybe it's around tax season. So if you have not filed and you're a board member, please do that. You are required to do that every year. I also have the public involvement policy on here because despite it not being quite like the other ones, public involvement is critical to everything that we do. And so it's important that this policy is a part of this whole process and how we operate. So I talked a little bit about this already, but there's some governance roles based on those bylaws and other things that have come up over time. And so the board is expected to attend monthly meetings as well as some other types of meetings that are necessary, as well as communicating with the public and collecting information from your community. So we want it to be a two-way street. We give you information about what's going on through our engagement efforts and things like that. And we also want to hear back from you on what you're hearing in the community and what makes sense to maybe make some changes as we go along with different processes. Your role is to approve and advocate for our MPO priorities and provide guidance. On the technical committee side, you also attend those different meetings that come up, as including our regular monthly meetings, helping distribute, coordinate, and collect information with member organizations. And you're also a big part of our public engagement side of things. So you know your residents better than we do. And so when it comes to processing information, getting that information out there through your own newsletters, we rely on your help in helping that information get out there, getting it to the right locations, spreading the word. And so your role is guidance and input and advancing your local transportation projects. And as I mentioned before, as MPO staff, we carry out the directives from the board, and we do planning work, modeling work, and financial management, especially when it comes to a lot of the things out of our yearly budget. To show you a little bit more about how this process works, this slide gives a general overview of how decisions are made. So MPO staff collaborate with a bunch of different stakeholders. We will get information together. Usually there's a lot of things that need regular updating in the MPO. Our plans need to be updated on a certain basis, so a few years, 5 years, things like that, as well as other things. But we'll get together that information, bring that to the technical committee for their review, and then the technical committee, depending on how they process that information, we hope that is recommended to the board, and that the board would then approve the updates, and then that would go back to us depending on what we need to do from there, make some changes. But that's generally how that process works. And the public is allowed to get involved at any point in time. So we do engagement, but we also allow public to give their comments at any and all meetings. So technical committee meetings, board meetings, or any part of a process or external to a process. And so the public is constantly involved in all of the different efforts that we're a part of. I did want to point out here that this is still generally how our MPO staff is organized. So we have our MPO executive director, and then we split into about 3 different groups. So we have the planning side, that's the planning manager and transportation planning staff. We have the modeling manager and then modeling staff, and then business administration and more things with data on that side. So this is our current staff. We are still looking for, I believe, 1 modeling and 1 GIS staff member. And this is also exclusive of our few interns that we have at the moment in time. As I mentioned before, North Carolina Department of Transportation is an important partner in all of the different plans and efforts that we have. And so I wanted to point out that there's a lot of different levels within the Department of Transportation, and they all have some different functionalities. And you may notice this over time and be curious about it. So we have the Transportation Planning Division that helps us with our comprehensive planning effort. That's the state comprehensive plan, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We also have the Integrated Mobility Division, so they help head some projects, especially transit projects. We have the local highway divisions that are part of our meetings and help with local projects. So that depends on each division. We have 3 divisions within our boundaries. So we have 5, 7, and 8. 5 is the one that is in the Durham area and has generally, I believe, more funding that is expected to be available in that general region. Not necessarily true right now, but that is generally speaking the case. We also have the Strategic Prioritization of Transportation Group. So they run the state's prioritization process, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. We also have those that are in charge of programming. And so feasibility studies is a different thing as well. So there's just wanted you to know that there's a lot of different groups and they do a lot of different things. They try to integrate as much as they can. And they are improving upon that process too, especially with some recent presentations that we've had, especially from Derek Lewis with the feasibility study unit. Other key elements to think about are we have 80,000 miles of public roads in North Carolina that are maintained by the DOT. And so that is the second most in the country behind Texas. It's a lot of roads. And NCDOT is also very important for us in terms of how they distribute federal funding. We also have Central Pines Regional Council that's critical to the MPO. We recently moved over to the Central Pines Regional Council from the city of Durham. And so to give you an idea of what that means and how the Central Pines and the DCHC MPO coordinate, I thought I'd give an example. So a 2017 report included about 70% of the MPOs across the United States, in which 2/3 of those MPOs said that they were hosted by another organization. So we are one of those that is hosted. And so we are a part of Central Pines Regional Council. And that offers benefits such as opportunities for cross-disciplinary cooperation. The Central Pines Regional Council does regional work. And so being a part of that regional entity makes sense for that collaboration opportunity. They also offer us other things like human resources needs. So I do have regional coordination in here, just as a point to say, it's hard sometimes when we say region to say what region we're talking about. And so that's something that we're cognizant about when we say these things, making sure we do define what regional looks like. And in our planning, regional should be the Greater Triangle region. And so Central Pines helps with a lot of other things. They help us with our long-range plan, which is our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, in that development. They also administer our Transportation Demand Management Program that we'll talk about in a little bit as well. And they have a whole grouping of other disciplines that help with regional coordination across these different counties. We also have partners who are important, which are the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, and the Federal Highway Administration, FHWA. They also serve a few different roles. Some things that are important to look at would include FTA does things related to public transportation funding and specific to transit. So they're overseeing the different projects and operations of the local transit providers. And then you have FHWA that helps more on the transportation planning activities, maybe less on the operations. And they also do our quadrennial certification process. So every 4 years, we go through a review to make sure that we're following all of the federal rules and regulations. Are there any questions at this point in time before we move on? I know I feel like I've been talking to myself, so I just want to make sure. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so we will keep going. So the DCHC MPO major planning documents are the Comprehensive Transportation Plan, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, the Transportation Improvement Program, and the Unified Planning Work Program. So how these all fit together? We have the CTP and the MTP that are our longer range plans. One of them is fiscally constrained and the other is not, but essentially it's all the projects that we would hope to do within a long range. So in this case, 25 plus years. And so we put together a list of projects that we want to have accomplished within that time frame. One of the plans then gets cut down to what we think we can accomplish in specifically 30 years based on the funding that we would expect to have in that time frame. And then from there, we have our 10-year plan, the TIP, and we look to see how many of those projects we can move from that MTP to the TIP that fit within that next 10 years of time. So essentially the process moves down so that the projects that we say we would want to have planned for can slowly become realized. And then our Unified Planning Work Program is our annual planning budget. And so that's updated to show some different splits in transit funding to keep those operations going every year, as well as different planning studies. And we'll talk about those on the next few slides as well. So as I mentioned, our Comprehensive Transportation Plan, or our CTP, this plan is currently being updated. It was last adopted in 2017, but it was a different version from what the state would now like for us to have as a different version with different kinds of project sheets. This is the document that's not fiscally constrained. People call it a wish list. I know the state has mentioned not using wish lists necessarily, but just having maybe a few extra projects that we might not be able to fund, but having them planned, and we know as a group that we want those to happen in the future. It does not necessarily have an update requirement, but as I mentioned, we are going to be updating this just so it is more current and modern. We have our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, or our MTP, and this is our federally required document. This is the one that is fiscally constrained, and so we set this document up so that we have projects in different time periods that would expect it to be funding. So we have somebody in the next, or projects in the next 10 years, and then we have the projects that are 11 to 20 years out, and then the projects that are approximately 21 to 30 years out. And so we look at how those projects move across boundaries, and that's how we determine if they're fiscally feasible. This is being updated at the same time as that state plan, the comprehensive plan. And we update this plan every 4 to 5 years. This is based on air quality. So what happens is there's different ways in which we measure whether or not we are in an attainment zone or non-attainment zone. So right now we are doing these updates every 4 years. I believe the next update should actually be 5 years after that, depending on if we are considered to be given the green light on moving forward. So that air quality conformity includes the capital area MPO, this yellow part in the map on the side, as well as the DCHC MPO area, and then a little bit of the Burlington-Graham Metropolitan Planning Organization as well to the left of, or to the west of DCHC MPO. Right now, this effort that we're going through for this update is known as Destination 2055. So you can find more about that on that specific website. And if I don't believe I mentioned it before, this PowerPoint is available on our website right now under our orientation materials, and there are links on just about every single page. So if you're interested in any of these things, you can go on there and click on those. We also have that Transportation Improvement Program, or the TIP. This is that 10-year program. So once we are able to fund projects from our longer range plan, it gets into this shorter range plan. We just adopted this one in 2024, so this year, this fiscal year. And so this one will go through 2033. We update this plan approximately every 2 years. There were 4 years between this update and the last update, just with COVID and different funding things going on. It's a maximum of 4 years between updates. This is where projects get funded. And so this one is a very important one, and is constantly changing, and you'll see amendments popping up for this all the time. There is also a requirement that this plan must match the state plan as well. So that's a critical piece, that when we are amending, we have to amend on our side, but then the state also has to amend on their side. Then we also have the Unified Planning Work Program. This is our annual budget. And there's a lot of things in here, but in large amount, it points to how we fund different studies. It also has different split letters for transit operations. And it includes other key elements such as our annual self-certification, so saying we're conforming to federal guidance and requirements, and has a lot of information, and this is updated on an annual basis. Are there any questions at this point in time before I move on? Okay, we'll keep going. So we have some other planning and policy work that we do. A lot of it ties into those different planning works, so the larger plans, but they are critical to the smaller tasks that we have that come up at the MPO. So one thing is bicycle and pedestrian planning. So through different processes, we go through the state prioritization of projects, where we make sure that we get in the projects that make the most sense to be competitive across the state. And we'll cover what that means in a little bit. But one thing that we look for in this type of planning is making sure that projects that are brought forward are in local plans, which means they have already been vetted by the community and they're deemed as important. We're also looking to see that those projects have been prioritized so that we know which ones are the most important and which ones are likely to be the ones that would be moving through. And this is critical for tying into those plans that we talked about earlier. For short range and longer range planning, making sure that we'd have the money possibly available in different cost projects and things like that. So it's critical for us to see in a lot of your local plans what you are planning for and what's prioritized. We also have some other updates coming up on the Triangle Bikeway study, because that project has been going on for a while now, and it's a matter of how it will get funded. Another important part of our planning process is the congestion management process. This is required by federal law. It relieves congestion and maximizes the safety and mobility of people and goods. You may have seen some things recently on this. I know Yanping is currently doing a couple of different sessions to bring people into this. There is also a congestion reduction training available through this link on the presentation if you're interested. But a part of this process is looking at developing performance measures. You collect and analyze the data, select different projects, and look at that performance and monitor improvements. So trying to work through that congestion management process. We do not specifically run this program, but it is something that we fund through the MPO every year. So this is the Transportation Demand Management Program. With our annual call for projects, both the DCHC MPO and the Capital Area MPO help fund this program, also known as Triangle Transportation Choices. It looks at encouraging individuals to use existing transportation infrastructure more efficiently by using alternate transportation methods. So those include things like taking transit, walking, biking, carpool and vanpool is a big one as well. And we have some different program participants in here, including City of Durham and Go Triangle. Some things to note are, because we fund it does not mean that you can't also receive, get a project funded in here. So if you are interested, please go ahead and apply. The previous application period just ended, so I believe it's going to be a little bit of time before this comes up again, but there are a lot of good programs happening right now for alternate commuting methods and things like that. We also do work with Title VI and environmental justice reports and pulling that information together. So we have an older report from 2017, which is our Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan. So this plan outlines what we still need to do to provide reasonable accessibility for those with disabilities. We also have our Title VI policy, which is our non-discrimination policy, which ensures that no person should be excluded from participation in any MPO activity on the grounds of race, color, sex, age, national origin, language proficiency, or disability. We also have our environmental justice report, and that's actively being updated. And this is a little bit unique for us. The environmental justice or EJ report guidance only says that you need to look at low income and minority populations for your communities that we're calling underrepresented communities. But the MPO actually has a few more groups within our report that call out more mobility related groups. So no car households, those that are older adults, and those with limited English proficiency. We also have our limited English proficiency plan, which is its own document, which looks at how many different groups there are or communities in our area, and how many of them speak different languages. We specifically have to look for safe harbor thresholds, which means that we would have approximately 5% or 1,000 people that speak a language other than English as their primary language. And so at this point in time, Spanish is the only non-English language that reaches that threshold as of the last update. But all of these different policies are being updated currently, other than the ADA transition plan. Other things that are happening in the MPO area that we take part in are the county transit plans and mobility management. So for reference, if you don't know, the Greater Triangle region has 3 different transit plans, and they are in Durham County, Orange County, and Wake County. In the DCHC MPO area, we have 2 of those plans. And these plans tell us how we're going to use different funds. And specifically, one of those funds are the transit tax. These plans are long range, but they also do have shorter range plans that are approximately 4 years at a time, and annual work programs. So some of the roles that the MPO has in these plans are leading the bus speed and reliability study in Durham. We also have oversight of alternate fund sources. So related to transit and mobility, we oversee the coordinated plan update, which looks at the mobility of older adults, those with disabilities, and those with low incomes. And we also oversee flexible funding requests, which are which we'll talk about in a little bit as well, but flexible funding is for transit projects and moving that funding from FHWA to FTA, I believe is the direction, essentially makes it so that you can go through your project process in a different format. So just to give you an idea of what regional transit looks like right now, here are our public transportation providers in the region. And so we also have some providers that are kind of on the outside of these areas. Chatham Transit does serve the entire county in Chatham, and the Piedmont Authority Regional Transportation part, they do have a commuter bus that comes through to Chapel Hill area. And so you have a few of these different overlaps trying to figure out how transit will work regionally for people who are trying to get from, let's say, the Raleigh area over to Hillsborough, and trying to navigate mobility for those groups of people. Something that you guys might not be aware of, we do have a wildlife corridor management plan coming soon. So if you were interested in what this looks like, we have an example from French Broad River MPO over in the Asheville area to our west. We have a lot of information already on what these wildlife corridors could look like and different opportunities. One thing I did want to point out in this with this information that we looked at is that in the state of North Carolina, on average, using what we know about how many accidents are actually reported, which in this number, we say this is the annual average of 21,000 accidents. We know that is higher because not all accidents are recorded, but just in that year, $500 million is used on these types of accidents. So knowing that we can provide better corridor connections for animals would also bring down the cost of what it costs to take care of these crashes that are happening. I wanted to point out that we have a handful of studies that are going on right now, and ones from the past that you might be interested in looking at if you didn't know we had them. And so something that comes up a lot is our US 70 studies. We have two of them. They're not all run by us. US 70 West is run by Orange County. US 70 East as well we'll be having an update, I believe, this upcoming month. We have our Safe Streets and Roads for All action plan going on right now. We also will be doing a new study on 15501. We also have a few studies such as the ITS Strategic Deployment Plan and the Freight Plan. So if you're interested in looking at those are a little bit old now, but they have some good information in them. Also important to know is how we look at forecasting what growth looks like in our region. So we have our triangle regional model, and this is a mathematical computer model that's used by transportation planning agencies in the region to develop and evaluate strategies that support mobility, access, economic health, and quality of life. So it does cover a larger area than the DCHC MPO and the capital area MPO. It does cover, as you can see in those blue pieces, a little bit outside that area, which helps for some potential growth in the future. But what happens is we look to you guys to help us with some of this initial data that can actually be fed into the model. So if you have heard of Community Viz, that's a part of this current long-range plan update. And we ask the local jurisdictions to provide information and updates on parcel data. And that parcel data, which is a part of the Community Viz process, is fed into this model, and that helps with our forecasting through this regional model. So in case you didn't know that, all that parcel data is really critical to our forecasting in the future for our long-range plan. Some things to know about if you didn't, we do have some planning resources that are available to you. So we have a Remix by VIA, which has some transit and streets resources. If you're interested in getting an account and you don't have one, please reach out to me and I'll just get you set up. But essentially those help with, I know members have said it helps with planning with the public and putting some information on maps to show people what different streets could look like with changes and things like that. It helps with transit planning as well to see if you changed a stop or a path, what it could look like. We also have our own software program. We call it the ETIP. It's the Electronic Transportation Improvement Program database. And this is where we store all of our short range project information. And so when you have a project that has an update in the short range plan, we ask that you go and you submit a TIP amendment request in there so that we can go and update the project and that it doesn't slow that project down. The ETIP right now is currently being updated with some older information, so it might not be exactly what your projects, the stages that your projects are at, but it will be shortly. So please be on the lookout for that, and please request TIP amendments if you know your projects have changed. We also have agenda item requests. So these are located on our website under the TC and board headings. But again, this is in the PowerPoint, so if you want to go and click on that, you can from the slides. But we have an agenda item request form. So if you need something like a letter of support, you would need to submit a request for us about 2 weeks before our technical committee meetings. So please be aware of that. As I mentioned before, we have something called flex funding for transit projects or access to transit. There's some different things that are going on with this process and how it looks at the state level. So we are trying to come up with some more guidance on what to follow for that process, and you'll be seeing some of that soon. But it's important to know that this is a lengthy process. And as you can see, just getting it through from FHWA to FTA in their own budget process takes 2 months. I don't know if this has changed, but that's something we are looking into and speeding up this process. Are there any projects at this point in time? We don't have too many projects or too many slides left after this. Okay, then we will continue on. So how do construction projects get funded in the DCHC MPO area? They can be funded actually in 2 different ways. So we're going to talk about how they're funded on the state side through the state prioritization process, as well as through the MPO directly with our call for projects. And this is specific to construction projects because earlier we mentioned how studies get funded in our annual budget process. But so the first way is through the Strategic Transportation Investment Law. So that's the STI law, oversees how the state prioritization process works. It sets the regulation for it. And so there's some important things to know about how projects can get funded. There is a requirement to separate different modes of transportation into different funding buckets. So as you can see on the left side of the screen, projects that are considered statewide mobility projects, so those that cover the larger area and outside of just having a regional impact, those are scored with 100% quantitative data. So usually they are projects that are considered maybe to reduce congestion or things like that, that are considered more beneficial projects by the state. And so there's no modal allocation for that. And so you can have different types of projects that can be funded with that statewide funding bucket. However, it's important to keep in mind that bicycle and pedestrian projects are not considered to be statewide mobility, so they could not be funded at the statewide level. But when it comes to regional impact and division needs, there's a certain split. So highway projects take priority based on the law. And so when it comes to funding these projects, you fund projects first through the statewide level. And then after projects have been funded there, whatever funding is left over goes to the regional impact level, and it is split between the different population groups. So there are 7 different regions, and so the funding is split into 7 different buckets that way. And then after that, the remaining projects that haven't been funded and can still be considered at the division needs level, that funding split 14 ways, and projects are then funded with that money. There's very little money that's still available at the division needs level just because it's split into so many buckets. So other things to keep in mind are through this process, we submit our best projects, which are the most competitive projects because they do compete with all projects across the state of North Carolina. We are also in the 7th cycle, so you might have just seen us go through our local input point methodology. So as you can see in this graphic on the right-hand side, local input points are a huge part of that overall score. And so that will that methodology helps determine what projects receive how much of those local input points. It looks like this graphic got a little bit messed up, but this second section in terms of how things get funded through the MPO is through our local call for projects. We call it our locally administered projects program. And this is a competitive program. We use this program as a strategy to fund projects that are less likely to be funded at the through the spot process through the state. which is in many cases specific to bicycle and pedestrian projects, just because there's also such little funding for those projects, and having to compete across the state for all of that funding. And so what you need to know is that when these projects get funded, there is a match requirement. So you would have to have a 20% local match that you give to an overall project. So if a project, let's say, were to cost $100,000 to complete, then you would have to put up $20,000 of that funding. That's not to say that that is how we do this process, because our projects, I believe, need to be $250,000 or more now to be considered in this process. But just so you know, it's that 80-20 match. So you need to make sure you have that money available. But you also need to make sure that this, because this process is a reimbursement process, you actually need to have all that money up front, and then you will be reimbursed that 80%. And so revisions to this policy are coming soon. But just so you know, for the scoring criteria, there are a handful of different things that we look at in terms of the overall score, which include connectivity, access to transit, population and employment density, and all the items down this list. And those are scored against all the other projects. This is specific to new projects. Existing projects are scored differently in this process, but you'd have to look at the policy if you're interested in learning more. So how do you share what you've learned today? We have a couple of resources on here for you to use. So if you're interested in this presentation, it's located under our Who We Are /overview page. We also have a briefing book if you'd prefer to look over that and get a different perspective. We have a residence guide to transportation that's available through the North Carolina Department of Transportation. It has some videos. You can also read up on some things, just giving you a few alternatives if you'd like to share a little bit more about maybe some of these processes in a more digestible way. And if you haven't heard of it before or haven't seen it, the Central Pines Regional Council puts out an elected official guide. So if you are interested what those who serve on that Central Pines board see and the things that they're looking at, they have their guide up on the website, and they're going to be updating that soon as well. And that is today's presentation. I hope you guys learned something, but are there any questions?